During World War II, Japan became a prominent producer and user of the midget submarine, with the most famous class being the Type A Kohyoteki, for which 50 subs were completed, HA-3 through HA-52. This specific class of sub is famous for being used at Pearl Harbor, Sydney Harbor, and Madagascar. A lesser known but more interesting fact is that Japan intended to use these submarines in the north, and as a result of this, they ended up constructing a base on land with docks on Alaskan soil. On the 5th of June 1942, Operation AL was underway, which consisted of the 5th Fleet taking the Aleutian Islands. This was a part of the complex Midway operation. At 1500 on the 6th of June, Japanese naval personnel land on the island of Kiska without meeting resistance, and the next day they are joined by Imperial Army troops, whom also land without meeting resistance. Though it was not apparent at the time, this was the furthest the northeastern corner of the empire would extend, meaning the Japanese Empire would end here. Being so close to the United States put the Japanese within range of heavy bombers, and by the 11th of June, the United States would begin bombing operations on Kiska Island in an attempt to bomb the Japanese off the territory, and bombing raids would become a near daily occurrence. The bombing raids did not deter the Japanese from containing the island, and by the 28th of June, the seaplane tender Chiyoda departed Japan en route for Kiska Island, and on board it contained 6 midget submarines, along with a handful of float planes. Chiyoda arrives at Kiska on the 5th of June, and it unloads the submarines, which have been freshly assigned to the 5th Guard Unit, and it also unloads the 12th Construction Battalion, which was there to construct a handful of maintenance sheds and rails leading to those sheds in order to maintain the submarines. A series of underground tunnels were also constructed connecting the maintenance sheds for the personnel to take cover in the event the United States attacked the island, and, since this threat was around all the time, the island's personnel were intended to live in these tunnels. It would not take long for the Japanese submarines to experience an attack from the United States, as on the very same day they arrived, the 3 destroyers that had escorted Chiyoda would all be attacked by the USS Growler, which resulted in one of them sinking and the other 2 being damaged. A few days later, on the 15th of July, the USS Grunion attacks 3 sub-chasers, sinking 2 of them and damaging the 3rd. The midget submarines would not be under immediate threat until the 7th of August, when Task Group 8.6, under the command of Rear Admiral William Smith, arrives at Kiska Island and begins bombarding it. This results in some of the incomplete maintenance sheds being damaged, and one of the float planes being destroyed. Following the bombardment, it was decided that 3 submarines would be kept on land, while the other 3 would be placed in the water, so in the event another bombardment occurred, not all 6 submarines would be under the threat of immediate destruction. On the 14th of September, another bombing raid takes place on Kiska Island, but this time it is escorted by a handful of P-38 fighter planes, which strafe the 3 midget subs in the water. The midget subs themselves, being constructed of 25mm of steel plating, were largely undamaged. The 12th Construction Battalion would continue plowing away at completing the maintenance shed, and by October, they had done just that, and the 3 submarines that were kept on land could finally be sheltered under the shed. This facility was a rather simplistic structure. Everything was constructed in a ditch. This ditch was large enough to hide the submarines from sea, while the shed itself slightly stuck above. The shed was 2-sided, and it was long enough to contain 1 midget submarine at a time. Running from the shed to the water was a track system reminiscent of what a steam train would run on, and at the very end of this track there was an electric winch that would be used to pull the submarines on land and lower them back into the water. The sole goal of this facility was to make sure that the submarines were operational at any given time. However, in the event that they took extensive damage, there were not enough supplies to repair them. The maintenance shed would get its first run of major repairs in December of 1942, when a series of storms sweep Kiska Island, and the 3 submarines in the water take the full brunt of the force. HA-28 ends up sinking, and HA-31 and 33 end up springing a handful of leaks. HA-28 was a total loss, while HA-31 and 33 were able to be repaired. On the 15th of February 1943, the submarines I-169 and I-171 depart Japan, both carrying midget submarines and supplies for Kiska Island. They would arrive and disembark their supplies on the 25th and 26th of February, respectively. On the 3rd of April, another heavy storm hits Kiska, and HA-31 and 33, once again moored at a buoy in the water, both take the brunt of the storm. Their mooring lines snap, and both subs end up beaching, with HA-33 being completely destroyed, and HA-31 taking heavy damage. A few weeks later, on the 14th of April, another air raid takes place, this time consisting of P-40 fighter planes, and they attack the submarines HA-29 and HA-34. Both are severely damaged and deemed impossible to repair, and since they were both on land, they would be scrapped for their parts. On the 7th of May, the Japanese finally decided to abandon Kiska Island, and the first personnel to be removed were the midget submarine crews aboard I-31 on the 12th of May. On the 30th of May, I-21 arrives and begins taking personnel from the maintenance sheds back to Japan, but it could not contain all of them, so another sub would have to be sent back. While the personnel waited for another submarine, on the 8th of June, they began destroying their submarine base, starting with the submarines. They would use demolition charges to sink the subs that were in the water, while the submarines on land would be destroyed using the warheads of their own Type 98 torpedoes. On the 10th of June, I-9 arrived at Kiska and departed more personnel, but 3 days later was sunk by the USS Fraser. The Japanese Navy decided to send a light cruiser to Kiska to pick up all of the remaining personnel, and in the meantime, demolition of the midget submarine base would continue. Throughout late June and early July, the Japanese would set fire to their maintenance sheds, dump the torpedoes, and destroy the tunnels at an increasing pace. On the 30th of July, the light cruiser IJN Kiso arrives and evacuates all of the remaining Japanese personnel, and in their wake they left behind a junkyard of midget submarines. On the 15th of August, 1943, Operation Cottage takes place, which was the United States invasion of Kiska Island, and they take the island without opposition since the Japanese had abandoned it. It did not take long to recognize the destroyed submarine facilities and the submarines that were left behind, and so everything was examined over the upcoming months, and eventually much of the facility was demolished, and some of the submarines were scrapped. However, today, there are a few submarines that actually remain on Kiska Island as relics of the past. The identity of the submarines that remain there today are unknown, but regardless of that fact, they are still very interesting pieces and well worth a visit if ever given an opportunity. With that having been said, there's nothing more to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below? Have a wonderful day.